The story begins in the Mojave Desert, the largest desert in the United States. A company had come here hoping to drill for oil, but their information was wrong. There was no oil to be found. Now everyone was being evacuated. A plane was sent to retrieve them, piloted by a man named Frank, who was accompanied by his co-pilot. The two of them were to fly all the employees and equipment back to Los Angeles. Everyone boarded the plane and set off for LA. However, a massive sandstorm began to brew in the vast desert. Frank's co-pilot asked what they should do. Frank reasoned that if they turned back, they would have to wait for more fuel to arrive for another attempt, and he didn't know how long that would take. Therefore, he decided they should press on. Frank flew the plane higher to try and get above the storm, but the aircraft was overloaded, and they became trapped in it. They tried to make contact via radio, but were unable to get a signal. Sand caused one of the engines to fail. Frank announced he would have to make an emergency landing and began descending. The landing was treacherous, with zero visibility. As the plane came down, its tail section struck a rock, causing the rear door to fly open. One passenger was sucked out and killed. The plane skidded violently across the desert before finally coming to a stop. Inside, they discovered 2 more passengers had died. They couldn't exit immediately because the storm was still raging outside. When the storm finally subsided, they saw the entire plane had been buried in sand. However, just a few hours later, the sand shifted and the plane became visible again. Everyone went outside to check their food and water supplies and realized they had enough to last for about a month. One man, confident from his experience running marathons and hiking, declared he would walk to safety. They needed to travel 200 miles, as they were now stranded somewhere in the American Southwest, though their exact location was unknown and their radio was dead. He was warned that it was July, the hottest month in the desert, where drinking 1 glass of water would cause your body to sweat out 10. He suggested traveling only at night, but was told that the surrounding hills were magnetic, rendering compasses useless and causing travelers to walk in circles. Realizing the futility, he abandoned his plan. That night, as everyone slept inside the plane during another storm, a man named Davis went outside to relieve himself. On his way back, he tripped on a rock, tumbled down a dune, and got lost in the storm. He screamed for help, but no one could hear him. In the morning, the group discovered Davis was missing. A search proved futile. He had been buried in the sand. Distraught, a woman approached Pilot Frank and asked if there was any chance of a rescue. Frank soberly stated the chances were only about 5%. He argued they couldn't leave because they were in the middle of the desert with limited supplies. Attempting to walk would deplete their water in 2 days, guaranteeing no one would survive. Despite the slim odds, Frank, an optimist, preferred to wait. As hope dwindled, 2 men decided to leave, taking some water with them. Frank intervened, declaring no one would take the water. A struggle ensued, and the water was spilled. At that moment, a man named Elliot stepped forward with an idea. He had been observing the plane and suggested they could rebuild it into a new, smaller aircraft. When Frank questioned his knowledge, Elliot revealed he used to design planes. No one knew much about Elliot because he hadn't been with the oil company. He had been hitching a ride with them for the past 2 years after a personal crisis. His revelation ignited a spark of hope, and the group agreed to the plan. Frank, however, was dismissive, firmly stating it was impossible. The next morning, a man named James wandered off. When the woman went to look for him, Frank insisted he would go instead. Frank found James near the rocky outcrop where the tail had hit and where the body of the fallen passenger still lay. The body was now stripped of clothing and bullet casings littered the ground. James, who had come to retrieve a watch he lost in a poker game to the deceased man, noted the watch was gone. They realized desert smugglers had been there, taking the watch and using the body for target practice. Frank urged James to return, but James refused, questioning why Frank didn't want to build the plane. Frank confessed he didn't want to give everyone false hope, as he believed it would never work. James countered that if you can't give people love, you should give them hope. And if you can't give them hope, you should let them do what they want. Moved, Frank agreed to help. The group began working together, laboring only at night to avoid the brutal heat. Their situation worsened when, one night, a spark from their welding landed on their reserved fuel, causing a massive explosion. No one was hurt, but all their fuel was destroyed, leaving only the petrol in the plane's tanks, which they now couldn't use for their work. Forced to work during the scorching days, they persevered. The most critical task was attaching a wing, a one-shot operation with no crane to lift it again. As they carefully lowered it, the chain snapped. The wing slid violently down and slammed into the fuselage. Everyone was horrified, but a man working inside emerged and announced he had succeeded. The wing had slid into its exact position upon impact. The frame was complete, and celebration erupted. They began clearing sand to create a runway. Their progress was threatened again when an electrical storm erupted, with lightning strikes threatening the fuel in the wings. Everyone fled except Elliot, who refused to abandon the plane. Frank tackled him to safety just as lightning struck, saving the life of the only person who could complete the aircraft. They named the plane Phoenix, after the powerful mythical bird of the desert. With water running low, they spotted smugglers camping in the distance one night. These were arms dealers trafficking weapons across the desert borders. Frank insisted on asking them for water, despite Elliot's objections. Frank and a few others went, with Frank and one man taking cover with a gun for backup. When they asked for help, one smuggler immediately shot and killed their companion. Frank and his partner returned fire, killing several smugglers, but one escaped. Frank had a chance to shoot the fleeing man, but couldn't bring himself to do it. James found his friend's watch on one of the dead smugglers, confirming these were the same men who had desecrated their friend's body. They brought the wounded surviving smuggler back to the plane. An argument broke out about what to do with him, and in the heat of the moment, Elliot shot him. This caused a fierce argument between Elliot and Frank. Elliot blamed Frank for their predicament and their friend's death. Frank, enraged, punched Elliot, hurting his pride. Elliot stormed off, refusing to work further. The woman, Kaylee, pleaded with him, stating they needed him. Elliot demanded a public apology from everyone, including Frank. Frank reluctantly agreed, acknowledging Elliot as the boss of the project, and work resumed. Later, they spotted the escaped smuggler returning with reinforcements. The smugglers held back, knowing the survivors had their weapons, and instead decided to wait for their water and food to run out. The group worked with renewed urgency and finally completed the plane. It was then that Frank found a magazine showing model aeroplanes. He discovered that Elliot's designs were for remote-controlled model planes for children. He had never built a real, full-sized aircraft. Everyone was furious, especially a man named Ian, who held a gun to Elliot's head. Elliot, however, remained confident, explaining that model planes required a perfect balance, and he was sure this one would fly. As a new sandstorm hit, a powerful gust of wind lifted the Phoenix slightly off the ground, proving its potential to fly and restoring the group's hope. After the storm buried the plane in sand once more, the group was disheartened, but Frank rallied them. They dug the plane out, dragged it to a clear area, and attempted to start it. After several tries, the engine roared to life. Hearing the engine, the smugglers charged on horseback, firing at them. With no room inside the small cockpit, everyone climbed on top and held onto the wings. The Phoenix sped down the makeshift runway as bullets flew past. The runway ended at a ravine, and for a moment it seemed they would crash. But the Phoenix lifted off, soaring into the sky as the survivors cheered, having conquered the impossible. In the end, photos showed them all happy with their families. Frank and his co-pilot started their own airline, naming it Phoenix Airlines. A magazine feature on Elliot was titled NASA's New Hope, implying he was now working for the space agency.